Billionaire falls in love with ex-wife's older sister, ready to marry her, but finds this shocking truth. In a world where love and betrayal intertwine, Victor Royce, a billionaire marked by heartbreak, finds solace in the arms of Clara, his ex-wife's older sister. As their romance blossoms, Victor's past comes back to haunt him in the most unexpected way. As he prepares to propose, an ominous sense of dread looms over him, and a shocking revelation threatens to unravel their love story. Clara is hiding something, a truth so explosive it could change their lives forever. Have you ever wondered how a single decision could alter the course of your life forever? What if the person you fall for carries a secret that could shatter everything you've built? Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful story family. Before we begin, I just want to take a moment to tell you something important. Making these stories is a labor of love for us. We put hours into crafting something meaningful and valuable, stories that, hopefully, leave a message about love, hope, and kindness. One of the things I love most is hearing how our stories resonate with so many of you around the world. So, please drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. It always warms my heart to see the diversity of our growing, supportive community. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Victor Royce stood at the edge of his penthouse balcony, the city sprawling beneath him like a living, breathing entity he'd conquered piece by piece. The CEO of Royce Tech had built an empire that stretched across continents, his name whispered in boardrooms and tech conventions alike. But tonight, the victory felt hollow. 6 months ago, his marriage to Camille had crumbled, not in a blaze of fury, but in the slow, suffocating drift of silence. He could still hear her voice from that final courtroom showdown, sharp and cutting, slicing through the polished veneer he'd spent years perfecting. "You never cared about us," she'd said, her eyes blazing with a fire he hadn't seen in years. "All you cared about was your company. You don't even know what it means to be a husband." He'd stood there, jaw tight, his own words cold and clipped as they left his lips. "I worked to give you a life most people only dream of. Do you think that came without sacrifices?" The judge's gavel had fallen like a guillotine, severing a decade of their lives with a single thud. Camille had walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor, leaving Victor with nothing but his thoughts. For months, he replayed that moment, wondering where it all went wrong. Was he so consumed by ambition that he'd lost sight of what mattered? The question gnawed at him, a quiet ache that no amount of whiskey or late-night meetings could drown out. Now, 6 months later, Victor found himself adjusting his tie in front of a gilded mirror, preparing for a night he'd rather avoid. Camille's charity gala loomed ahead, a glittering affair he'd agreed to attend under the guise of business. Royce Tech had donated generously to her cause, clean water initiatives in underserved regions, and showing his face was a calculated move to keep the press from spinning tales of bad blood. He told himself it was just optics, nothing more. But as he stepped into the sleek black car waiting outside his building, a flicker of unease stirred in his chest. Seeing Camille again, surrounded by her world, would stir up ghosts he wasn't ready to face. The gala was held in a grand ballroom, all crystal chandeliers and polished floors, the kind of place where wealth and goodwill mingled uneasily. Victor arrived late, slipping through the crowd with practiced ease, nodding at familiar faces, tech moguls, philanthropists, the occasional politician. He spotted Camille across the room, radiant in a silver gown, her laughter ringing out as she charmed a group of donors. She hadn't seen him yet, and he wasn't sure he wanted her to. He grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing tray, letting the bubbles burn down his throat as he scanned the room for an escape. That's when he saw her. She stood near a table adorned with auction items, her presence quiet but commanding. Clara, Camille's older sister. Victor's memory of her during his marriage was vague, a soft-spoken woman who'd hovered on the edges of family gatherings, always busy with something, never drawing attention to herself. But tonight, she was different. An emerald dress clung to her frame, catching the light in a way that made her seem almost luminous. Her dark hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, and when she turned, her hazel eyes met his for a fleeting second before she looked away, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Victor didn't know why he moved toward her. Maybe it was the way she stood apart from the chaos, untouched by the clamor of the gala. Maybe it was the exhaustion of his own solitude. Whatever it was, his feet carried him across the room before his mind could catch up. "Clara, right?" he said, his voice smoother than he felt. She glanced up, startled for a moment, then nodded. "Victor, I didn't expect to see you here." "Business," he replied, lifting his glass slightly. "Royce Tech's a sponsor. I'm just playing my part." Her smile widened, warm and genuine. "Camille mentioned you donated. That's generous of you." He shrugged, the compliment landing awkwardly. "It's good PR, and the cause isn't bad either." Clara tilted her head, studying him. "You don't strike me as someone who does things just for show." The observation caught him off guard. He was used to people seeing the CEO, the billionaire, the man who built an empire from nothing. But Clara's gaze felt different, like she was looking past the surface, searching for something he wasn't sure he wanted to reveal. He took a sip of champagne to steady himself. "What about you?" he asked, steering the conversation away. "What brings you here?" She gestured to the auction table. "I've been helping with the event. Camille's passionate about this, and I've always been the one to pitch in when she needs me." There was a quiet strength in her words, a steadiness that Victor found oddly comforting. He remembered bits and pieces of Clara's story from Camille, how she'd stepped up when their parents struggled, working odd jobs to keep the family afloat, while Camille chased dreams of glamour. Clara was the anchor, the one who held things together. He hadn't thought much of it then, but now, standing beside her, he felt the weight of her resilience. Their conversation flowed effortlessly after that. She told him about the kids she'd met on a trip to one of the water project sites. Bright-eyed, full of hope despite their circumstances. He shared a rare story from his early days at Royce Tech, when he'd slept on a cot in his office because he couldn't afford rent. They laughed, the sound mingling with the hum of the gala, and for the first time in months, Victor felt something shift inside him. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, just a spark, faint but undeniable. As the night wore on, they drifted to a quieter corner of the ballroom, away from the crowd. Clara leaned against a pillar, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "You're not what I expected," she said, her voice soft but direct. He raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect?" She hesitated, then met his gaze. "Camille painted you as cold, driven, someone who didn't have time for anything but work." Victor's chest tightened. It wasn't a lie, but hearing it from Clara stung more than he cared to admit. "Maybe she was right," he said, his tone guarded. "Maybe I'm still figuring out how to be more than that." Clara didn't respond right away. She just looked at him, her eyes searching his, and in that silence Victor felt exposed, like she could see the cracks he'd spent years hiding. Then she smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips. "I think there's more to you than you let on." The words lingered between them, heavy with possibility. Victor wanted to say something, to keep the moment alive, but before he could, a voice cut through the air. "Clara, there you are." Camille approached, her silver gown shimmering as she moved. She stopped short when she saw Victor, her expression shifting from surprise to something unreadable. "Victor," she said, her tone cool. "I didn't think you'd show." "Business," he repeated, the word feeling flimsier this time. Camille's eyes flicked between him and Clara, a shadow passing over her face. "I see you've met my sister." "We were just talking about the auction," Clara said quickly, stepping forward. Victor's been asking about the projects. Camille nodded, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Well, don't let me interrupt. I need Clara for a moment, though. Donor stuff. Clara glanced at Victor, an apology in her eyes. I'll be right back. He watched them walk away, Camille's arm linked with Clara's, her head tilted close as if sharing a secret. The spark he'd felt with Clara still hummed in his veins, but now it was laced with something else. Unease. Camille's presence had shifted the air, reminding him of the life he'd lost, the mistakes he'd made. And yet, Clara was different. She stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. As the gala buzzed around him, Victor stood alone, his mind racing. He didn't know it yet, but that night was the beginning of something he couldn't control. Clara's warmth, her quiet strength, had pulled him in, and he was already falling hard. But there was a shadow beneath her calm exterior, a secret she carried like a weight. She'd sworn to keep it buried, locked away where no one could find it. And as Victor watched her disappear into the crowd with Camille, he had no idea that secret would soon turn his world upside down. Victor Royce wasn't a man who chased anything or anyone. His life had been a calculated ascent, each step deliberate, each victory earned through grit and precision. But Clara had shifted something in him, cracked open a door he hadn't even known was there. After that night at the gala, her face lingered in his mind, those hazel eyes, that quiet smile, the way she'd seen through his polished exterior without judgment. He couldn't shake it. So, for the first time in years, he followed an impulse. It started with a call. He'd found her number through a mutual contact, claiming it was about the charity. But the moment her voice came through the line, soft, steady, warm, he knew it was more than that. "Clara," he said, leaning back in his office chair, the city skyline stretching out beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows. "I was wondering if you'd have time to grab a coffee. I'd like to hear more about those projects you mentioned." There was a pause, a rustle of movement on her end, and then she laughed, a sound that hit him like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Coffee? Victor Royce doesn't strike me as a coffee date kind of guy." He smirked, caught off guard by how easily she teased him. "Maybe I'm full of surprises." "All right," she said after a beat. "Tomorrow, then. There's a place near my apartment. Nothing fancy, but the coffee's good." The next day, he found himself outside a small cafe in a part of town he rarely visited. Narrow streets lined with brick buildings, the air carrying the scent of roasted beans and fresh bread. Clara was already there, sitting at an outdoor table, her hair pulled back loosely, a simple sweater draped over her shoulders. She waved when she saw him, and, as he crossed the street, he felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Nerves, maybe, or anticipation. They talked for hours that day. The coffee grew cold, replaced by a second round, then a third, but neither noticed. She told him about her life, how she'd worked 2 jobs through her 20s to help her family, how she'd found purpose in volunteering with kids who needed extra care. He opened up, too, more than he'd meant to, about the pressure of running Royce Tech, the sleepless nights, the way success had started to feel like a cage. With her, he didn't have to be the untouchable billionaire. He could just be Victor. "You're easy to talk to, Clara," he said as the sun dipped low, casting golden streaks across the table. "With you, I feel like I don't have to be perfect." She smirked, leaning forward slightly, her elbows resting on the table. "Perfection isn't real, Victor, but honesty is." The words stuck with him, burrowing deep. Honesty. He hadn't realized how little of it he'd had in his life, how much he'd hidden behind ambition and control. With Clara, though, it felt possible, natural even. From there, it snowballed. Coffee turned into dinners at her modest apartment, a cozy space filled with mismatched furniture and books stacked on every surface. She cooked for him. Simple meals, hearty and warm, nothing like the sterile Michelin-starred plates he was used to. One night, she stood at the stove, stirring a pot of pasta sauce, while he chopped vegetables at her tiny counter. The air smelled of garlic and basil, and soft music played from a speaker in the corner. "You're terrible at this," she said, glancing at his uneven chunks of onion with a grin. He laughed, holding up the knife. "I run a tech empire. I don't dice onions." "Clearly," she shot back, stepping closer to guide his hand. Her fingers brushed his, steady and sure, and for a moment the world narrowed to just that, the warmth of her touch, the quiet hum of her breathing. He looked at her and she met his gaze, her smile fading into something softer, more unguarded. They didn't kiss that night, but the tension hung between them, electric and alive. Days turned into weeks. They walked through parks together, leaves crunching underfoot as autumn settled in, their conversations stretching late into the night. She showed him how to slow down, how to notice the way sunlight filtered through branches, how to listen to the wind instead of drowning it out with schedules and calls. He'd spent so long chasing the next big thing that he'd forgotten what it felt like to just be. Clara reminded him. One afternoon, she invited him to a community center where she volunteered. The room was loud, chaotic, filled with kids, some in wheelchairs, some with bright, curious eyes that tracked every movement. Clara moved among them with ease, kneeling to tie a shoelace, laughing as a little boy tugged at her sleeve. Victor watched, struck by her patience, her grace. When she waved him over, he hesitated. He wasn't good with kids, wasn't sure he even knew how to try, but she didn't let him retreat. "This is Mia," she said, introducing a girl with pigtails and a shy smile. "She loves puzzles. Want to help her with one?" He nodded, awkward at first, but soon he was sitting cross-legged on the floor, piecing together a jigsaw with Mia, while Clara watched, her eyes warm with approval. Later, as they left, he pulled her aside. "How do you do it?" he asked. "Give so much without burning out?" She shrugged, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "They give me more than I give them. It's not about me. It's about them." That night, he called his assistant and arranged a donation, a hefty one, to the center's programs. When he told Clara, her reaction wasn't what he expected. She didn't gush or fawn. She just looked at him, her expression soft, and said, "Thank you, Victor." "That means more than you know." Their bond deepened after that, a quiet rhythm settling between them. He found himself canceling meetings to see her, trading late nights at the office for evenings on her couch, her head resting against his shoulder as they watched old movies. He'd never felt this before, not with Camille, not with anyone. Clara didn't demand or push, she just was, and that was enough. More than enough. But the world doesn't stay still, and neither do the shadows of the past. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when everything shifted. Victor was in his office reviewing quarterly reports when the door burst open. Camille stormed in, her designer coat billowing behind her, her face a mask of fury. His assistant trailed after her, flustered, but Camille waved her off with a sharp gesture. "Camille," Victor said, standing, his voice calm but edged with caution. "What's this about?" She didn't sit. She didn't even pause. She planted her hands on his desk, leaning forward, her eyes blazing. "You and Clara? How long has this been going on?" He froze, the air thickening around him. He'd known she'd find out eventually. Word travels fast in their circles. But he hadn't expected this. Not this raw, unfiltered anger. "It's not your business," he said, keeping his tone even. "We're divorced. I don't owe you an explanation." "You don't owe me?" she snapped, her voice rising. "After everything? You think you can just waltz into my family and take my sister like some kind of prize?" "It's not like that," he shot back, heat creeping into his words. "Clara's not a prize. She's—" He stopped, unsure how to finish, but the pause only fueled Camille's rage. "She's what?" she demanded. "Your redemption? Your second chance? You don't even know her, Victor. Not really." He crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. "I know enough. And I know this isn't about me. You're jealous. You can't stand that I'm moving on." Camille laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the glass walls. "Jealous? Oh, please. I'm not here to win you back. I'm here to warn you." She straightened, her gaze piercing. "You think you found happiness with Clara? Before you get too comfortable, ask her what she's keeping from you. Ask her about Ben." The name landed like a punch, sharp and unexpected. "Ben?" he repeated, his brow furrowing. "Who the hell is Ben?" Camille's lips curved into a tight, knowing smile, but there was no warmth in it. "That's the question, isn't it? Figure it out, Victor. Before it's too late." She turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving the room buzzing with her absence. Victor stood there, staring at the empty doorway, his mind racing. Ben. The name meant nothing to him. No face, no context, just a blank slate that gnawed at his thoughts. Was Camille bluffing, lashing out to ruin what he'd found with Clara? Or was there something real behind her words, something Clara hadn't told him? He sank into his chair, the reports forgotten, his fingers drumming against the desk. Clara had never mentioned a Ben, not in their late-night talks, not in the quiet moments they'd shared. She'd been open about her past, her struggles, her family. Hadn't she? Doubt crept in, slow and persistent, threading through the warmth he'd felt with her. He didn't want to believe Camille, didn't want to let her poison this fragile, beautiful thing he'd built. But the seed was planted, and it was already taking root. That night he went to Clara's apartment as planned, but the ease between them felt strained. She greeted him with a smile, her usual warmth, but he couldn't shake the weight of Camille's words. They cooked together, chicken and rice, her favorite, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the confrontation, dissecting every memory of Clara for a clue he might have missed. She noticed, of course. She always did. "You're quiet tonight," she said, setting the table, her tone light but probing. "Everything okay?" He nodded, forcing a smile. "Just a long day." She didn't push, but her eyes lingered on him, searching. They ate in near silence, the clink of forks against plates filling the gaps. Afterward, they sat on her couch, a movie playing in the background, but Victor couldn't focus. The question burned in his chest, demanding release. Finally, he turned to her, his voice low. "Clara," he said, hesitating. "Who's Ben?" Her reaction was instant, her body stiffened, her breath catching just enough to betray her. She set her glass down, slow and deliberate, her gaze dropping to her hands. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with something he couldn't place. Fear, maybe, or regret. "Camille," he admitted. "She came to my office today. She was upset about us. Said I should ask you about him." Clara's jaw tightened, and for a moment, she didn't speak. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until she finally looked up at him. Her eyes were guarded now, a wall sliding into place where openness had once been. "Camille doesn't know what she's talking about," she said, but the words felt hollow, rehearsed. "Clara," he pressed, leaning forward, "if there's something I need to know." "There's nothing," she cut in, sharper than he'd ever heard her. She stood, crossing her arms, her movements restless. "She's trying to get between us. That's all this is." He wanted to believe her. Every part of him ached to let it go, to pull her close and forget the name that hung between them. But her reaction, the tension in her shoulders, the flicker of panic in her eyes, told a different story. He stood too, stepping closer, his voice soft but firm. "Clara, I'm falling for you. You know that. But I need to know the truth. Who is he?" She met his gaze, and for a heartbeat, he thought she'd tell him. Her lips parted, her expression wavering, but then she shook her head. "It's late," she said, turning away. "You should go." The dismissal stung, but he didn't argue. He grabbed his coat, pausing at the door to look back at her. She stood by the window, her silhouette framed against the city lights, her arms wrapped around herself like a shield. "We're not done talking about this," he said quietly. She didn't respond. As he stepped into the night, the cold air biting at his skin, Victor's mind churned. Clara was hiding something big, and Camille knew it. The trust he'd built with her felt fragile now, teetering on the edge of a truth he couldn't yet see. Who was Ben? A lover? A friend? A ghost from her past? And why did the mention of his name shake her so deeply? He didn't know it yet, but that question would lead him down a path he couldn't turn back from, a path where love and secrets collided, where every step forward pulled him deeper into a storm he wasn't prepared for. Clara's wall was up, but Victor wasn't a man who gave up easily. He'd find the truth, no matter what it cost him. And as he walked away, the city humming around him, one thought pulsed through his mind. Whatever Clara was hiding, it was only the beginning. Victor couldn't sleep. The city hummed outside his penthouse, a restless pulse that matched the churn in his gut. Clara's words, or lack of them, had haunted him since he'd walked out of her apartment. "He's someone I used to know." It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. The way her voice had trembled, the way her eyes had darted away from his. It was a wall, and behind it, something waited. Something she didn't want him to see. But Victor wasn't the kind of man to let questions fester. He'd built his life on answers, on control, and this loose end was fraying him. The next morning, he called her. She picked up on the third ring, her voice cautious. "Victor, we need to talk," he said. No preamble, no softness. "In person. I'm coming over." "Victor, I don't think—" "I'm not asking," he cut in, already grabbing his keys. "I'll be there in 20. When he arrived, Clara was waiting at her door, arms crossed, her expression a mix of resignation and defiance. She'd pulled her hair back tight like she was bracing for a fight, and the sight of it twisted something in his chest. He didn't want to fight her. He just wanted the truth. "Clara," he started, stepping inside as she moved aside. "Last night you shut me out. I can't keep doing this blind. Who's Ben?" She turned away, busying herself with the kettle on the stove, though her hands shook as she filled it. "I told you, he's someone from my past. That's it." "That's not it," he said, his voice rising despite himself. "You're hiding something. I can see it in you. Every time I say his name, you flinch. What are you so afraid of?" The kettle clattered against the burner as she set it down too hard. She gripped the counter, her knuckles white, and for a long moment she didn't speak. Then, slowly, she turned to face him, her hazel eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You want the truth? Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." Victor braced himself, his heart pounding as she took a shaky breath. He was someone I loved," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Years ago. I was young, maybe too young, and he came into my life like a storm, intense, unpredictable. We were together for a while, months that felt like years, and then one day he was just gone. No note, no call. Nothing. He vanished." Victor frowned, stepping closer. "Vanished? What do you mean?" "I mean he disappeared," she snapped, her composure cracking. "I woke up one morning and he wasn't there. His stuff was gone, his phone was off. I looked for him. God, I looked everywhere, but it was like he'd never existed. I didn't know if he was alive, dead, or just done with me." The pain in her voice cut through him, sharp and raw. He wanted to reach for her, to pull her close, but the weight of her story held him back. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" he asked, softer now. Because it's not a story with a neat ending, she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Because it broke me, Victor. And I didn't want you to see that part of me, the part that's still picking up the pieces. He moved then, closing the distance between them, his hands resting gently on her arms. Clara, I'm not here to judge you. I just need to understand. Camille threw his name at me like it was a weapon. Why? Clara stiffened under his touch, her gaze dropping to the floor. Camille, she knew him too. She was there when it happened, when he left. She saw what it did to me. Maybe she thinks it's some kind of leverage now, something to hurt you with. Victor's jaw tightened. That's low, even for her. But there's more, isn't there? Something you're still not saying. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. Victor, please, let it go. I can't, he said, his voice firm but pleading. Not when it's eating at you like this. Not when it's coming between us. Tell me the rest. She pulled away, crossing to the window, her arms wrapped tight around herself. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until she spoke again, her words halting. Ben wasn't just some guy. He was complicated. Dangerous in ways I didn't see until it was too late. But that's all I'm giving you. The rest doesn't matter. Dangerous how? Victor pressed, his mind racing. Clara, if he hurt you... He didn't hurt me, she cut in, turning to face him. Not like that. He left a mess. And I've spent years trying to clean it up. I won't drag you into it. But Victor wasn't satisfied. The gaps in her story were glaring, and the more she held back, the more his imagination filled them with shadows. Dangerous. Complicated. The words echoed, stirring an unease he couldn't shake. He stepped closer again, his voice low. I'm already in it, Clara. I'm in this with you. But I need the whole truth. She shook her head, tears spilling over now. You don't know what you're asking for. If I tell you everything, it'll change how you see me. It'll change us. Then let it, he said, reaching for her hand. I'd rather face that than keep guessing. For a moment, she looked like she might break, might spill it all right there. But then her shoulders slumped, and she pulled her hand away. I can't, she whispered. Not yet. Victor stared at her, frustration warring with the ache in his chest. He wanted to push, to demand more, but the rawness in her eyes stopped him. Instead, he nodded, stepping back. Okay, but this isn't over, Clara. I'm not walking away from you, or this. He left her standing there, the kettle whistling behind her, a shrill cry that followed him out the door. Back in his car, he gripped the steering wheel, his mind a tangle of questions. Ben, a storm, a disappearance, Clara's tears. It didn't add up, not yet, but he'd find the pieces. He had to. Days passed and their conversations grew strained. Clara threw herself into her work at the community center, dodging his calls with excuses about long hours. Victor buried himself in Royce Tech, but the distraction didn't hold. He started digging, quietly, carefully, reaching out to old contacts, people who might know something about Clara's past. He didn't want to invade her privacy, but the not knowing was eating him alive. It was a week later when he found it. A name in an old company file, buried in a stack of records from his father's tenure as CEO, Benjamin Royce. Victor's half-brother, a child from an affair his father had kept hidden, a secret even Victor hadn't fully grasped until now. Ben had worked at Royce Tech briefly, years ago, before dropping off the map. Victor remembered him vaguely, tall, brooding, a man who'd never fit into the family's polished world. They'd barely spoken, separated by years and resentment, and then Ben was gone. The realization hit him like a punch. Clara's Ben was his Ben, his brother. The pieces snapped together, jagged and sharp, but one question burned brighter than the rest. What had Ben done to her? That night he drove to Clara's apartment, his heart pounding as he climbed the stairs. She opened the door, her face paling when she saw him. "Victor, what?" "Ben was my brother," he said, cutting her off, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "My half-brother. I found his name in the company files. Clara, what happened between you two?" She froze, her hand gripping the doorframe, her breath hitching. How did you—" "I looked," he admitted, stepping inside. "I had to know, and now I need you to tell me the rest. What did he do to you?" Clara stumbled back, sinking onto the couch, her hands trembling in her lap. "Victor, you don't understand. If I tell you, it'll ruin everything." "Then ruin it," he said, kneeling in front of her, his eyes locked on hers. "I'm not losing you to a ghost." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as sobs broke free. When she finally spoke, her voice was a fractured whisper. "Ben, he didn't just leave me. He took everything, my savings, my trust, my heart. He was running from something, debts, I think, or worse, and he used me to disappear. I didn't know who he really was until it was too late." Victor's blood ran cold. "He stole from you." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "And more. He made me think we were building a life. I was so naive. When he left, I had nothing. Camille helped me pick up the pieces, but she never forgave him, or me for falling for it." Victor sat back, his mind reeling. Ben, his own flesh and blood, had torn Clara apart and left her to drown. Rage simmered in his veins, but beneath it, guilt gnawed at him. His family's secrets had hurt her, and now they were his burden too. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Because I was ashamed," she said, meeting his gaze at last. "And because, if you knew, you'd look at me like you are now, like I'm broken." "You're not broken," he said fiercely, taking her hands in his. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met, and I'm not walking away from this, from us." She searched his face, her tears slowing, but doubt lingered in her eyes. "Victor, there's more. Things I haven't said, things Ben did that I can't take back." "What things?" he pressed, his grip tightening. She shook her head, pulling her hands free. "I can't. Not tonight. Please, just give me time." He wanted to argue, to demand the rest, but the exhaustion in her voice stopped him. He nodded, standing slowly. "I'll wait. But Clara, whatever it is, we face it together." As he left, her words echoed in his mind, a quiet confession she hadn't meant him to hear. She'd whispered it to herself as he stepped into the hall, her voice barely audible through the closing door. "If Victor finds out who Ben really was and what he did to me, will he still love me?" Victor froze, his hand on the railing, the question hanging like a blade. What else was she hiding? What had Ben done that she couldn't say aloud? The truth was close, he could feel it, but it was a storm he wasn't sure they'd survive. And as he descended the stairs, the weight of it settled over him, a promise of chaos yet to come. Victor sat in his office, the city skyline a blur beyond the glass, his mind a storm of jagged edges. Clara's confession had left him hollowed out. Ben, his half-brother, a thief who'd stripped her bare and vanished. But there was more, she'd said, things she couldn't take back. The words gnawed at him, relentless, until he couldn't stand the silence anymore. He needed answers, real ones, not the fragments she'd offered. If she wouldn't give them, he'd find them himself. He picked up his phone, dialing a number he hadn't used in years. "James," he said when the line clicked. "It's Victor Royce. I need you to look into someone." James Carter was a private investigator, a man Victor had hired in the early days of Royce Tech to vet competitors and sniff out leaks. Discreet, thorough, and unflinching. Exactly what Victor needed now. "Name?" James asked, his voice gruff, all business. "Clara Ellis," Victor said, the words tasting bitter. "And a man named Benjamin Royce. My half-brother. Dig deep, James. I want everything. Timeline. Yesterday, Victor snapped, then softened. As fast as you can. It's personal, James grunted. I'll call when I've got something. The wait was torture. Victor threw himself into work, signing contracts, barking orders, but his focus splintered. Every time his phone buzzed, he lunged for it, only to find emails or texts from people who didn't matter. Clara called once, her voice tentative, but he let it go to voicemail. He wasn't ready to face her, not until he knew the whole story. 3 days later, James showed up at his office, a thick envelope in hand. He was a wiry man, graying at the temples, his coat rumpled like he'd slept in. "You sure you want this?" he asked, dropping the envelope on Victor's desk. "Some doors don't close once you open them." Victor's pulse quickened. "Just tell me what you found." James leaned back, crossing his arms. Clara Ellis, 38. No criminal record, clean credit now, but 10 years ago she was a mess. Bank accounts drained, eviction notices, the works. All tied to Benjamin Royce. He was living with her back then, off the books, no lease, just her word on some old utility bills. Looks like he cleaned her out and bolted. Victor's fists clenched. "I already know that part." "What else?" James hesitated, then tapped the envelope. "Medical records. Took some doing. Hospitals don't like sharing. But I've got a guy." Clara was pregnant, Victor. 9 years ago. Lost the baby at 5 months. The air left Victor's lungs, his vision narrowing. "Pregnant?" "Yeah," James said, his tone flat. "Miscarriage. Doctors called it stress-induced. Happened right after Ben disappeared with her money. She was admitted to a hospital in Queens. Malnourished, dehydrated, borderline breakdown. Took her months to recover." Victor stared at the envelope, his hands trembling as he reached for it. He flipped it open, scanning the pages, hospital charts, dates, a doctor's scrawl noting, "Patient reports extreme emotional distress following abandonment." The words blurred as rage and grief twisted inside him. Ben hadn't just taken her money. He'd taken her child, her future. "There's more," James said, watching him closely. "Ben showed up in your orbit again, didn't he? About 5 years back." Victor's head snapped up. "What?" "Found a paper trail. Ben Royce hit you up for cash, wired you a sob story about needing a fresh start. You sent him packing. No money changed hands." Memories flickered. Ben at his doorstep, unshaven, desperate, spinning tales of bad luck. Victor had been cold, unforgiving, still bitter from their father's lies. "Get out," he'd told him. "You're not my problem." He hadn't known, hadn't even suspected what Ben had left behind. James stood, adjusting his coat. "That's the gist. You've got the files. Call if you need me." When he was gone, Victor sat there, the envelope splayed across his desk like a wound. Clara's pain, Ben's betrayal, his own ignorance, it crashed over him, wave after wave. He wanted to scream, to break something, but instead he grabbed his keys and drove to her apartment, the truth burning a hole in his chest. She opened the door, her eyes widening at the fury etched on his face. "Victor, what?" "You were pregnant," he said, stepping inside, his voice shaking, "with Ben's kid. And he left you to lose it alone." Clara's hand flew to her mouth, a choked sob escaping. How did you?" "I hired someone," he cut in, pacing the small living room. "I had to know, Clara. You wouldn't tell me, so I found it myself." "You loved my brother? The same man who came to me, begging for money, and whose betrayal cost you everything." She sank onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. "Victor, I didn't know. I didn't know Ben was your brother. I didn't know how broken your family was. I didn't know we would end up here." He stopped, staring at her, his anger fracturing into something softer, more jagged. "Why didn't you tell me? About the baby, about all of it?" Because I couldn't, she said, her voice breaking. I couldn't say it out loud, losing her. God, Victor, it nearly killed me. And Ben, he didn't just take my money. He took my hope. I was so ashamed, so scared you'd see me as damaged. Damaged? He knelt in front of her, his hands hovering, unsure. Clara, you're not damaged. You're everything I've been missing. But this changes things. She looked up, her eyes red and raw. What do you mean? I turned him away, he said, his voice cracking. 5 years ago, Ben came to me. He was a wreck, asking for help, and I slammed the door in his face. If I'd known what he did to you, if I'd helped him, maybe— No, she said fiercely, grabbing his hands. Don't do that. Don't take his sins on yourself. You didn't know. But I should have, he shot back, pulling away to stand. He was my blood, Clara. My family hurt you, and I didn't see it. She rose, stepping closer, her voice trembling but firm. Victor, listen to me. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to carry this. It's my weight, not yours. He shook his head, pacing again, his thoughts a tangle. I wanted to marry you, you know. I was ready to ask. But now, how do I build something with you when my brother's ghost is between us? Clara froze, her breath hitching. Marry me. Yeah, he said, turning to face her, his eyes burning. I love you, Clara. I've loved you since that night at the gala. But this, Ben, the baby, it's a wall I don't know how to climb. She crossed to him, her hands framing his face, forcing him to meet her gaze. Then we climb it together. I love you too, Victor. I didn't want to. I fought it. But I do. And I'm tired of letting Ben take more from me than he already has. He searched her eyes, the storm in him quieting. Just a little. You mean that? Yes, she whispered, tears falling anew. But you have to forgive yourself first, for not knowing, for turning him away. It wasn't your fault. Victor pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, her warmth seeping into him. I don't know how, he murmured into her hair. But I'll try. For you. They stood there, holding each other, the weight of the past pressing down but not breaking them. Not yet. Hours passed, the room dimming as the sun sank, and they talked, really talked, about Ben, about the baby she'd lost, about the years of guilt they'd both carried. Victor told her about his father's affair, the shame of a brother he'd barely known. Clara spoke of the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, blaming herself for trusting Ben. I named her, she said at one point, her voice soft. The baby. I called her Lily. It was just in my head, but it made her real. Victor's throat tightened. Lily, that's beautiful. She nodded, a faint smile breaking through her tears. I think she'd like you. The confession settled between them, a fragile thread tying their pain together. But even as they clung to each other, a shadow lingered. Victor couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more, something Clara hadn't said, something Ben had left behind. He didn't ask, not then. He'd pushed her enough for one night. As he left her apartment, the city alive with lights below, he felt the shift. They'd faced the truth, or most of it, and survived. But forgiveness for Ben, for himself, was a road he wasn't sure he could walk. And Clara's love, fierce and real, came with a price, the ghosts of a past neither of them could bury. In the car, his phone buzzed, a text from James. Found one more thing. Call me. Victor stared at the screen, his heart sinking. Whatever it wasn't over. Not yet. The air between Victor and Clara hung heavy in the days that followed their confrontation. The truth about Ben, about Lily, about the tangled web of their pasts had carved a space neither could ignore. Victor returned to his penthouse that night, the city's restless glow a mirror to his thoughts. He wanted Clara, wanted them, but the weight of his brother's betrayal clung to him like damp earth. Forgiveness wasn't a switch he could flip. It was a jagged path he'd have to walk, step by uncertain step. Clara felt it too. She called him the next morning, her voice small but steady. "Can we meet? Somewhere quiet?" They chose a park near her apartment, a stretch of green tucked between towering buildings. It was late afternoon, the sun dipping low, casting golden streaks across the grass. She waited on a bench, her hands clasped in her lap, her hair loose and catching the light. Victor approached, his coat unbuttoned, his usual polish softened by the shadows under his eyes. "Hi," she said, standing as he neared. "Hi," he echoed, stopping a few feet away. "You okay?" She nodded, then shook her head, a faint laugh escaping. "Not really. You?" "Same," he admitted, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I didn't sleep much." "Me neither," she gestured to the bench. "Sit with me." They sat, the space between them a silent question. Clara spoke first, her voice low. "I've been thinking about what you said, about marrying me, about us, and I keep wondering if you can really look at me the same way, knowing everything." Victor turned to her, his brow furrowing. "Clara, I don't look at you any differently. If anything, I see you more. How strong you are, how much you've carried. I don't know how to let go of what Ben did." She reached for his hand, her fingers tentative. "I don't expect you to. Not right away. I've had years to wrestle with it, and some days I still lose. But I need you to understand what it was like. The pain. Losing Lily wasn't just losing a baby. It was losing who I thought I'd be." He squeezed her hand, his throat tight. "Tell me. I want to know." She took a breath, her gaze drifting to the trees. "When Ben left, I was alone. No money, no plan, just me and her. I'd talk to her, in my head. I'd imagine her growing up, what she'd look like. And then one night, the pain started, sharp, relentless. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't afford a doctor. By the time I got to the hospital, it was too late. They told me stress, malnutrition. My body couldn't hold her. I blamed myself for months. Years Victor's chest ached, her words painting a grief he couldn't touch but felt all the same. "Clara, that wasn't your fault. It was Ben's. He did this to you." "And your family," she said softly, meeting his eyes. "That's what scares me, Victor. You're tied to him, and I don't want you to feel like you owe me something because of it." "I don't," he said, firm but gentle. "I love you because of you, not because of him. But I need time to figure out how to live with this, how to be the man you deserve." She nodded, tears glinting in her lashes. "I need time, too, to trust that you won't walk away when it gets hard." They sat there, hands clasped, the park emptying around them as dusk settled in. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start, a fragile bridge between their wounds. The weeks that followed were quiet, deliberate. They didn't rush. Victor cut back on late nights at Roy's Tech, showing up at Clara's with takeout or groceries, cooking together like they had in the beginning. She invited him to the community center again, letting him into her world one piece at a time. They talked about Ben, about Lily, about the future they weren't sure they could claim. It wasn't easy. Some nights ended in silence, others in tears. But they kept going. One evening, as they washed dishes in her cramped kitchen, Victor paused, a plate dripping in his hands. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low, "about forgiveness. I don't know if I can forgive Ben, not fully, but I can let him go. For us." Clara turned off the faucet, drying her hands on a towel. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm done letting him define me," he said, setting the plate down. "He was my brother, but he's not my life." "You are." She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "You mean that?" "Yeah," he said, pulling her into his arms. I'm not perfect, Clara. I'll mess up. I'll doubt myself, but I'm here. I want this, us, more than anything. She rested her head against his chest, her voice muffled. I want it too. I'm just scared. Of what? That I'll lose you, she whispered. Like I lost everything else. He tilted her chin up, his thumb brushing her cheek. You won't. I'm not going anywhere. They kissed then, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that sealed promises neither had spoken aloud. It was a turning point, a crack of light in the dark. Months rolled by, their rhythm steadying. Victor sold his penthouse, trading it for a house just outside the city, a place with a yard, room to grow. Clara moved in, her books lining the shelves, her laughter filling the halls. They weren't perfect. Arguments flared over small things, where to hang a picture, whose turn it was to cook, but they fought through them, learning each other anew. One crisp fall morning, Clara woke early, a strange quiet settling over her. She slipped out of bed, leaving Victor asleep, and padded to the bathroom. Her hands shook as she opened a drawer, pulling out a test she'd bought on a whim. Minutes later, 2 pink lines stared back at her, and her breath caught. She waited until Victor stirred, finding him in the kitchen, coffee brewing. He glanced up, smiling. You're up early. Victor, she said, her voice trembling as she held out the test. Look. He froze, his eyes widening as he took it, the realization dawning. You're pregnant? She nodded, tears spilling over. Yeah. I didn't think, after Lily, I wasn't sure I could. He crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms, his own eyes glistening. Clara, this is incredible. Are you sure? She asked, her voice small. It's soon, and after everything. I've never been more sure, he said, cupping her face. This time I won't let anything come before my family. You and this baby are my new beginning, Clara. She laughed through her tears, clinging to him. A new beginning. I like that. They stood there, wrapped in each other, the weight of the past lifting just enough to let hope breathe. Hours later, they sat on the porch, coffee forgotten, talking about names, about the nursery they'd paint, about the life they'd build. Victor's phone buzzed, James again, but he silenced it. Whatever it was could wait. This couldn't. I was thinking, Clara said, her head resting on his shoulder. If it's a girl, maybe Lily. To honor her. Victor's throat tightened, but he nodded. And if it's a boy? She smiled, soft and sure. We'll figure it out. Together. Together, he echoed, kissing her forehead. The sun climbed higher, warming the world around them, and for the first time Victor felt it. Redemption. Not just for himself, but for them both. Ben's shadow lingered, a faint echo, but it no longer ruled them. They had trust, fragile but growing, and a future neither had dared to dream of until now. As Clara's hand rested on her stomach, Victor knew this was their healing, a chance to rewrite the story, one heartbeat at a time. Months melted into a blur of anticipation, the house Victor and Clara shared, transforming with each passing day. The nursery took shape, walls painted a soft blue, a crib assembled with more laughter than instructions, tiny clothes folded and stacked in drawers. Clara's pregnancy wasn't without its shadows. There were sleepless nights when she'd wake, her hand pressed to her stomach, fear whispering that history might repeat itself. But Victor was there, his voice steady, his presence a tether. We've got this, he'd murmur, pulling her close. You're not alone this time. Spring arrived, the air thick with the scent of blooming trees, when Clara's water broke. It was late afternoon, sunlight spilling through the kitchen window as she gripped the counter, a sharp gasp escaping her lips. Victor dropped the spoon he'd been stirring soup with, his eyes wide. Now? Now, she said, half laughing, half wincing. The drive to the hospital was a haze of nerves and quiet reassurances, Victor's hand never leaving hers. Hours stretched, the labor intense but steady, and Clara's strength left him in awe. She squeezed his fingers until they ached, her breaths ragged, but her eyes locked on his, a silent promise holding them together. At 2:17 a.m., their son arrived, a squalling, red-faced bundle with a shock of dark hair, his cries piercing the sterile room. Victor cut the cord, his hands trembling, and when the nurse placed the baby in Clara's arms, time seemed to pause. She looked down at him, tears streaming, her voice a whisper. "Hi, little man. You're here." Victor sank onto the bed beside her, his arm around her shoulders, staring at the tiny life they'd made. "He's perfect," he said, his throat tight, "just like his mom." Clara smiled, exhaustion lining her face, but joy outshining it. "What do we call him?" They'd tossed around names for months, but in that moment one settled between them like it had always been waiting. "Eli," Victor said, testing it. "Eli Royce." "Eli," she repeated, brushing a finger over the baby's cheek. "Yeah, that's him." The days that followed were a whirlwind. Sleepless nights, first baths, the clumsy dance of new parents finding their footing. But every cry, every quiet moment with Eli nestled between them, stitched their wounds tighter. Victor watched Clara with him, her gentleness a mirror to the strength she'd always had, and felt the last threads of Ben's shadow slip away. This was their future, bright and unbroken. One evening, as Eli slept in his crib, Victor found Clara on the porch, a blanket around her shoulders, staring at the stars. He joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts?" She leaned into him, her voice soft. "I was thinking about how far we've come. A year ago, I didn't think I'd ever feel this whole." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Me neither. You and Eli. You're my redemption, Clara. I didn't know I needed saving until you." She turned, her eyes shining in the dim light. "And you're mine. We healed each other." They stood there, the night wrapping around them, Eli's soft breaths drifting through the open window. It wasn't a perfect ending. Life never was. But it was theirs, forged from pain and promise, a family built on trust and love. Thanks for sticking with us through this story. It's been a wild ride, love, loss, secrets, and a little guy who's changed everything. So here's the question. What would you do if love came into your life in an unexpected, complicated way? Could you forgive the pain of the past for the promise of a better tomorrow? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care.